William Davis from Wineguystv.com, and we're going to talk a little bit about Ribera del Duero. So with me today I've got Alvaro Comenge from the Bodegas Comenge in the Ribera. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, my pleasure. So an awful lot of history with your family, and certainly in terms of what we consider Spanish wine books and things like that. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your grandfather and what he wrote?
Yeah, well, my grandfather Miguel, he was a doctor, a scientist. He was very much into analyzing different foods and stuff. He was passionate about wine, and at the beginning of the 20th century, around in the 1930s, he wrote a book which is still considered like one of the main reference books in terms of what was happening in the wine industry in Spain at that time, what varieties grew in the country, what wines were being made. And he, by gathering samples from all the different regions, analyzed them chemically and did a complete scientific analysis, and ended up with a book which has been the first and the only book for years talking about what was happening in the wine industry, and has been used in most of the university studying agriculture and enology and all sorts of food studies.
So so your grandfather, he was based out of the University of Madrid, correct?
No, he was. In fact, he was a professor in the Barcelona University. Both my grandfather and my grandmother came from Valencia, a region at the east of Spain, and they ended up in Madrid for there was no work in Valencia, so they had to kind of move to Madrid to try and get some work. It was a very difficult time. It was the civil war in Spain at that time, and it was a very rough time at that time.
So fast forwarding, your grandfather, even though he wrote about grape varietals and wine, did he make wine?
No, he never got to make any wine. He was passionate about it. He loved wines, but he never got to make any wine. That's why my father wanted to go one step further and try to do what my grandfather would have always loved to do.
Wow. So, but your father didn't start making wine until pretty late in his years.
Yeah, in his 60s. It was pretty much when he ended his professional life. He worked for the government for some time, and then he worked in some other big Spanish companies. And when he was tired of working for other people, he decided he wanted to start a new business, something that would make him happy. And he remembered how my grandfather worked with all the samples he received in their dining table at home, and how he was so involved in writing this book. And my father was a young kid, and he just played with my grandfather and the samples and how he dried the different leaves, and the samples he received were in the newspapers. It was why he wanted to go into the wine business. Plus, he had been promoting Spanish products outside of Spain for a lot of years with the government, and one of the star products in Spain is wine. So he was very, very much into this industry.
So what's so special about Ribera? We know it's not too far from Madrid, which is obviously one of the reasons why we decided to make wine in Ribera del Duero. But what makes Ribera so very special as opposed to other areas in Spain?
I think it's a combination of different elements. First of all, the weather. We have very extreme temperatures, temperatures that can go up to 105 degrees during summer and down to minus 0.4 degrees during the winter. There's a lot of wind. The altitude is quite high for Spain. We are between 2,500 feet above sea level to 3,050 more or less. That's the altitude of the Ribera del Duero. And the soils are very poor, very calcium rich, and in general it's a very we have very good conditions to make a good quality wine, although it's not easy because of the conditions of the area. We have lots of frosts, hail, and during very delicate times of the year. So sometimes it can be very challenging to make wine in Viddler. But we think that it's one of the best winemaking regions in Spain, that's for sure.
Yeah, because we always hear about the history of Ribera. You know, we think of Bodegas Comenge, we think of, you know, Alejandro Fernandez, you know, with what he's done. Because you started, you know, relatively late in the scene. I think, when was the winery founded? About 10, 12 years ago?
We started buying land and planting in 1999, so it's about 10 years ago.
And what makes your wines so, you know, what makes your wines similar to those very classic producers, and what makes it so unique?
Well, you mentioned two producers, Alejandro Fernandez and Bodegas Comenge. We are very close to them in terms of distance. We're maybe from Alejandro Fernandez maybe 2 miles apart, and from Bodegas Comenge maybe 10 miles apart. And we are in what is called the Golden Mile of Viddler, where most of the main producers are situated. And that, of course, gives us a certain similarities to them, because the weather is basically the same. The soils are very similar, and depending on how you have them oriented and what sort of altitude you have your estates, there can be some differences, but mainly it's the same sort of soil and the same weather. However, what makes us so different is first of all, our plantation system, which is different. We have a lot more plants per hectare. We have the maximum allowed by the DO, which is 4,000 per hectare. That's a lot more than the rest of the people. Our rows are closer together, and the plants are also closer together. We also are working with sustainable agriculture. We don't use any pesticides or herbicides. We allow wheat to grow in between the rows, because what we want to do is to enhance competition among the plants, so that our production is not very big. The yields in our fields is very low, almost half of what is the average in the area. And we are looking for very concentrated fruit, and to achieve that, we need the plant to struggle for the nutrients. So we let wheat grow. It's quite a nice scene. And most of the people around us think we're crazy doing that, but we find that is the balance that we get by letting all this wheat grow in between and having so many plants per hectare, is that we get less fruit, but the fruit is much better quality. And that's one thing, our planting system. The other thing is the way we select our fruit. We have, obviously we hand harvest, but as opposed to having a trailer pick up all the fruit and then take it to the winery and with a conveyor put it into the tank, we take it in small boxes, and once they get to the winery, we have a first check of the clusters that come from the field, and then through a conveyor goes into a destemmer, and after the destemming we have another table with about 10 to 12 people selecting the berries one by one, making sure that no pieces of the stem go into the tank, no grapes which are green or maybe overripe will go into the tank, and that way we only get the best fruit into the wine, which we think is key to making a good wine.
Absolutely.
And then we also take away all the green parts, which we think only give negative properties to a wine, like astringency and harshness and things we want to avoid.
Now, what do you do with, in terms of, you know, when you age the wine? Do you typically using French or American oak, or?
We have two brands. One of them is not yet being imported, but Comenge typically has about 85% French oak and 15% American oak, of which 1/3 is new oak, 1/3 is 1-year-old oak, and the rest is 2-year-old oak. After that, we change the barrels. We want to make sure that the micro-oxygenation that goes through the pores of the wood will continue, and after 3 or 4 years, the barrel has basically no micro-oxygenation going on.
Awesome. Well, I think a great wine, certainly typical of Ribera, but something that I'm glad to taste. So,
thank you.
Cheers. Well, William Davis from Wineguystv.com, here with Alvaro Comenge. Thanks again for watching.
Thank you.